and there is literally tons of games going on. We have 4 to start everything off on Thursday, 16 on Friday, 16 on Saturday, and that's just March Madness. I mean, you can get into the NIT, CBA. We could be here all night, Brett, but we're not going to do that. We're just talking about the dance. We're talking about what really matters, right?
We could literally be here for days talking about college basketball, Higgins. But let's just start on the Thursday game because you and we already announced last episode. I'm on Drake minus, or excuse me, I'm on Wichita State minus 1.5 versus Drake. This is the number 11 seed play-on game. But I see you're also on. I mean, I know you're on Drake, but you're also on the UCLA Michigan State 11 game, Higgins.
I am. We're going to get to that in a second, Brett, but don't be stealing my Drake pick. I heard you try to sneak right past that just because the line has flipped and Drake is now a 1.5 point favorite when Wichita State was the 1.5 point favorite when you took it. 3 point line movement. I see you trying to hop on the bandwagon. I'm not having it. That's my pick. That's my
No,
pick.
no, no, sir. I still think Wichita State has a good chance in that one, but all of the analytics, Higgins, would say Drake. They're one of the best teams in the country against the spread, one of the best teams record wise in the country. So, they didn't win their conference tournament. Loyola Chicago won their conference tournament, but those are two really good teams. I'm going to take the bigger conference team. I'm going to take Wichita State. I think they get a different level of recruiting there. Isaac Brown's got his interim tag removed. People are doubting Wichita State. Higgins, I'm not.
Well, we shall see. I will tell you, Brett, I will hint at my bracket a little bit. I do have whoever wins this matchup beating USC in my Western bracket. I don't necessarily have them going super far. There's a lot of tough competition in that bracket, but I think they could get a first round win, maybe get into the round of 32.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a possibility as well, Higgins. And I have picked that in a few of my brackets as well. Um, I will say for UCLA, Michigan State, though, Higgins, not as confident that either of these teams can get through BYU. Although I would say if I'm BYU, I would rather see UCLA sitting there for me.
This is another scenario that I have them going more than one round, not just on their Thursday night win. I think they would win on Saturday as well. UCLA versus Michigan State is going to be one of the first big tests that we really get in terms of which conferences are actually the strongest, because a lot of this year has been almost exclusively, if not entirely, just within your own conference for some of these teams. So, what is that going to mean when they're all finally mixing together? We're going to see that some of these conferences were actually really, really strong, like we thought this year, and then maybe some were just overhyped with a lot of teams at similar type of strength that won't be as strong here. I think Pac-12 versus Big Ten here, UCLA versus Michigan State. It's going to be a very interesting matchup, but I'm just going off of who has played better more recently, and that's Michigan State. They kind of did rebound in their last 10 games, going 7-3 compared to UCLA. And so I'm going to take the Spartans -2. Remember the last time there was March Madness, Tom Izzo and the Spartans went all the way to the Final Four. So that that's pretty favorable to me. They got the experience.
Yeah, I mean, Izzo is known for winning in March, Higgins, but I think this is an interesting matchup for a variety of reasons. I think, these are two great programs that are always going to draw attention when they play against each other, but they're both very down right now. That's the reason it's a first four matchup. So, Michigan State, UCLA should be a lot of fun. Should be a lot of notoriety. I like your pick though, Higgins, because I'm with you. I think Michigan State is the better team right now.
Let's jump into the true round of 64, though, and talk about the games that really matter for everyone's brackets. And before we start talking about our actual picks, Brett, real quick, do you bet against your bracket, or do you find your bets often will align with your bracket?
I'm usually betting with my bracket. I like Well, I don't want to spoil our episode, but for instance, if there's a team with injuries, right, or COVID sickness or something like that, I will probably, find the spread, find myself against on the spread against that team, and then also in my bracket against that team as well. So I guess I typically align.
I typically align too. I mean, maybe if you have a future that you can sometimes like hedge against, that's where I would bet against my bracket. But overall, like especially in the first round, I'm betting with my bracket or I'm staying away from that game on a bet typically because otherwise you're just tearing yourself apart right from the beginning, it feels like.
Right. No, I totally agree with that, Higgins. I mean, in the last episode, I put a half unit on Texas to win the tournament outright at plus 4,500. To me, that's not only this bet, but I'm basically getting that Texas Alabama game in the Sweet 16 at Texas plus 4,500, and then whatever Alabama's favored at. So I feel like that's a more fun way to bet it, a way you can kind of hedge out. I can put a little bit extra on that game to maybe make up for the juice I'll have to pay on the money line.
Yeah, so let's get into these games though, and I'm not afraid to admit that I'm taking Arkansas in a 3 versus 14 scenario. So this is a side that I see the Razorbacks should win this. They're the 3 seed, but I think that they should also maybe get a little more respect than an 8.5 point spread against Colgate, who is 14-1, but it's entirely against the Patriot League, who Lafayette, Bucknell, Lehigh. We've seen the Patriot League do things in the past, but not necessarily your always strongest or most confident conference compared to the SEC, where Arkansas fought amongst a much different SEC than you typically see, where it was down for Kentucky but almost up for everyone else, and it was some great competition.
Yeah, the SEC was a lot of fun this year, Higgins. You're right. It was a weird year for Kentucky basketball. I think Arkansas exceeded a lot of people's preseason expectations. They're a good team. But don't sleep on Colgate. Colgate's been pretty impressive this year, Higgins. I'm kind of with you. This 8.5 doesn't really seem big enough, but it was big enough to get me to stay away. So I I can't really comment. I think you're on to something. I think conference play will, be an important factor in this March Madness because you didn't have the normal out of conference games that you do in normal years.
Another thing about that game that we aren't going to see in a lot of these other picks we talk about, Brett, is the over under for Colgate, Arkansas is set at 161 right now. And that's because both of these teams average over 80 points per game. Their defenses are a little tighter than that, only allowing around 70 points per game. But are we going to see a shootout like that? I mean, some of these other games that we're going to talk about, there you see the over-unders in the 130s, 140s typically. 161's pretty up there.
161 is a high total. You were right, Higgins. These teams are gonna score, so it's just gonna be a fun game to watch. I think you're onto something. Maybe the athletes at Arkansas are just too much for Colgate because that's something I lean on. How talented is the best player on the court? Like, can he go and win you a game? Is another thing I lean on in March as well. Coaches that have been there. You mentioned Tom Izzo, so these are all things I look for when I'm betting in March Madness, Higgins. And, Eric Musselman's a great coach. He's done it at a few programs. So it's not crazy to think Arkansas could blow Colgate out of the water.
But, Brett, on Friday, you are picking a spread against a coach that has a lot of history in March Madness, aren't you?
I am. Jay Wright has a history in March Madness. Higgins, you mentioned it, a national champion. But Villanova has a kind of a checkered history because they either lose in the first weekend or they go to the Final Four, Higgins. And unfortunately for Jay Wright and the Wildcats, This year, I think they're a little bit too banged up. I think Pat Kelsey and the Winthrop Eagles get to Villanova and they play the 12-5 upset roll that everyone bets on every year, Higgins. But I actually am going to take it one step further. In the 13, what is it, 13-4 in that bracket as well, the Purdue North Texas game. Taking North Texas, Higgins.
Ooh. Is that a podcast pick or is
So
that a bracket pick?
just in my bracket, but
Okay.
I don't trust Purdue. I don't trust Purdue. I'm thinking North Texas might be able to pull off that upset there. That's a bracket giveaway for you guys.
And if we have Winthrop versus North Texas in the second round, that's a bracket buster for everyone. I'd be surprised who has Winthrop North Texas in there besides Brett Levy. But that's why you should join into our bracket pool because if Brett's not right about that, then maybe you can get a little edge on him coming out the first weekend. I'll be interested to see that Winthrop. I have Villanova personally in my bracket, but there is one other Friday game I have a pick on, Brett. Utah State versus Texas Tech. And we've talked about Texas Tech a lot this year as well. And I think that they're just kind of hitting their stride a little bit better. Utah State, it's kind of a similar mind of what I was talking about with the Colgate, Arkansas. You got a Big 12 versus a Mountain West. Big 12 was pretty fun to watch this year. So Texas Tech, Mac McClung's hit some big shots already this year. Wouldn't be surprised if they can do it again. -4 for an 11 versus a 6. -4 isn't that big of a spread for me. So I'm going to go with the favor. I'm going to take those points before more money gets onto that by Friday and potentially makes it bigger.
All right, we'll see what happens in that game, Higgins. I have no true read on that game. Utah State's a really good team. I wouldn't just overlook them, but like you said, Texas Tech battle tested in the Big 12, which is arguably the best conference in college basketball this year.
Utah State only played one game against the top 25 team this year and they lost. So Texas Tech, a little bit tougher competition this year. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. But Brett, before we stop talking about Friday and go on to our Saturday games, we're not going to get out of here without talking about Syracuse at least a little bit. At least a little bit. And Syracuse versus San Diego State. I like Syracuse's side of the bracket personally in the Midwest. They're on the better side of the bracket, in my opinion.
Honestly, Higgins, it's one of those things where everyone's so mad that Syracuse is in the tournament that, oh, they're just in because Boeheim has a history and blah, 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 blah. Well, you know why they put us in and you're all mad? Because that's when we play well. I don't know why, but that's when our teams show up. It's when everyone's like, "Oh, what the hell is Syracuse doing in there?"
Winning.
Uh yeah, exactly. That's when we make our miracle Final Four run. So plus what was it? Plus 150,000 Higgins. What I don't even remember what it was. Plus 15,000. There it is. Our odds for Syracuse to win the championship. I think we're robbing the sports books, Higgins.
I agree. I'm not going to bet on the first round game. I'm going to watch that out of enjoyment now. Giving me the West Coast time frame because they're playing San Diego State, I appreciate that. The 6:40 tip-off time for me, very much appreciated to the tournament and to the commissioners. Thank you very much.
Well, that's what happens when you're a road dog. Syracuse +3 on, well, not on the road in Indianapolis versus San Diego State as the lower seed. Normally when you see this matchup, you think the ACC school would be the higher seed, but Syracuse definitely not deserving of that this year. Although Buddy Boeheim in the ACC tournament, Higgins caught absolute fire, and I'm obviously biased, but I'm hoping it continues into the big tournament here.
It'll be interesting to see for sure. Let's talk about Saturday though, Brett, because Friday is when you're going to see the South and the Midwest play basically, and then Saturday is when you see the East and the West play. And right off the bat, we have two teams that we've talked about a lot in the past few episodes, Georgetown and Colorado. And Brett, you've liked both of these teams recently. They've been good to you. So how are you dealing with this?
Yeah, I mean, I told you, Higgins. Colorado's a team I think is built for March. Well coached and with upperclassman point guard and McKinley Wright, and I think Colorado minus 5.5. Not enough respect being given to Colorado. I think people are giving a lot of respect to Georgetown. They just won a Big East championship game, but this is the next step for this program. Georgetown. It's been a while since they've been in the NCAA tournament. Higgins. It's nice for them to be back. Their next step is to win a game. I think Colorado is a program that is looking to consistently win games in the tournament and take that step. So I think Colorado's program's a little bit ahead of where Georgetown's is. Not to say Georgetown couldn't catch up in a few years, but in this particular matchup in March 2021, Colorado minus 5.5. Their program's a little bit ahead of Georgetown right now.
My bracket might disagree with you.
Well, you needed 12-5. You just took the wrong one. You took Nova. No, you're supposed to take Colorado, Higgins.
I'm going to talk about a 215 though, Brett. I obviously don't think Grand Canyon's going to beat Iowa. I think Iowa's built for March, kind of like what you were saying with Colorado. I like Iowa as a team, but Grand Canyon is an interesting matchup for them right out the gate. They have a 7-footer, 270-pound senior to match up against Luca. So I think that might be to the book's favor for Grand Canyon. Plus 14 and a half. I think you can keep it within that margin. So I'm going to put a unit on that.
My hope is that you become Grand Canyon's second most famous fan because you're not going to catch Frankie Muniz, but you could be second, Higgins.
Yeah, Ashbourne Midgard. 7-footer, 270-pounder from Denmark. I'll be his biggest fan. Frankie can be the biggest fan of Grand Canyon. I'll be this guy's biggest fan.
7'2" from Denmark. Okay. Well, hey Syracuse, there's some footers in Denmark. We should start looking over there.
Absolutely. That's who I like in the West, and we're going to get back into the West in a little bit, Brett. But let's talk about the East. And I like another one of these for a similar reason. Abilene Christian against Texas. One of the things I didn't mention about Grand Canyon is they're the fifth best team at covering the spread in the country in all of the NCAA this year. It's pretty nice when you're playing against a Texas team that is, or when they're playing against an Iowa team that hasn't been all fantastic against the spread. They're just over 500. Similarly, Abilene Christian in Texas. Abilene Christian's the sixth best team against in the nation against the spread. Texas, Texas is about 500 against the spread. So I'm gonna go with Abilene Christian, who it's also a state rivalry a little bit for Abilene Christian, not for Texas. Texas is gonna be like Abilene who, and they're gonna see some disrespect with that. Wildcats get your head in the game, +9, taking them on the spread. They don't have to win, just cover. Don't have to win, just cover.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe my blinders are on with this one, Higgins. But I actually really like Texas in this spot. I just think kind of what you were saying about the conference play, man. I do think that's going to be a factor. I guess not in every game. Like, I guess there are exceptions to the rule where a team in a smaller conference is just so exceptional, right? Like Gonzaga, right?
Yes.
But Abilene Christian, they're not Gonzaga yet. So I think Texas in this one. I also, just to preview a little something here, Higgins, Texas in my Final Four. Now they're not beating Gonzaga or anything like that, but they're there. Hey, they saying, "Hey, what's up? We're here."
They're saying hi a little bit. They're waving.
Yeah, they're here. They get to make the trip from Indy to Indy.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's my last pick for Saturday, Brett, and that's one of the last games of the night. It's not the last game of the night, though, is it?
No, but I'm on another game in the East before I get to the last game in the
Oh,
night,
I'm sorry.
Higgins.
I jumped you with, yeah, I did jump you.
All
I'm sorry.
good, all good. I'm taking my first small conference guy here. Saint Bonaventure takes on LSU, and the Bonnies win the A10 tournament, win the A10 outright, and get disrespected in the 8-9 game. That is brutal, Higgins. 1.5 point dogs plus 106 on the money line, Higgins. I'm not having that disrespect. I'm rolling with Woj. I'm rolling with the Bonnies plus 106 on the money line.
Okay, on the money line. I've been sticking with the spread, trying to find some value with those early lines there. You're confident you're betting on one of your bracket upsets, aren't you, a little bit?
A little bit. I think the Bonnies are, they're one of these Houstons. They're one of these Gonzagas. They're an elite team from a conference that may not be the SEC, the ACC, the Big Ten, the Big 12. But
The
they're
A10
good,
does have its
Higgins.
years, though.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're a good team. The St. Bonaventure's Bonnies are really good this year. And then we'll finally get to the late game, Higgins. The last game of the week or of the first round, Ohio versus Virginia. Virginia's had tons of COVID issues, Higgins. I'm taking Ohio +7. I'm taking Ohio plus 280 on the money line. Ohio can score. Ohio's a really fun team to watch out of the MAC. Plus, I have a good friend on the coaching staff there, so I am rooting for Ohio personally. So again, a little bias. Take that into your handicap here, but I'm all in on Ohio against Virginia with the COVID issues.
Ohio averages over 80 points per game, and Virginia is typically known to slow the game down and all of that, which I guess they did start doing a little more later in the season, but this Virginia team is not their normal team at all. It's not their normal standard of defense or any of that. So I do kind of like your reasoning for this pick, even though I don't necessarily agree with it. I did take Virginia in the first round of the bracket, but it is not a normal Virginia year. You are right. They aren't going to go as far as they typically do sometimes. I think this
Yeah,
is going to be an early out for them
I
this year.
mean, it's just the tough circumstances for Virginia with the late arrival to Indianapolis. They're not going to have the opportunity to practice there. So this screams Ohio to me, Higgins. You know, different year, different circumstances. Virginia could probably get Ohio, but unfortunately, Virginia got hit with the COVID bug as the conference tournaments were wrapping up. They beat Syracuse, then didn't get to play their next game against Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech ends up going on and winning the ACC championship. So uh, just a crazy year for some teams, and unfortunately, it's going to really hurt Virginia here, I think.
Absolutely.